Ethan had always been a light sleeper, but lately, something had been waking him at exactly 3 a.m. At first, he thought it was the wind rustling the trees outside his old, isolated house. Then, one night, he truly listened and realized it was the sound of digging. It started as a soft scraping, like a shovel biting into the earth. Then came the dull thud of soil being tossed aside. It was rhythmic, methodical, and unrelenting. Every night, it would begin at 3 a.m. and continue for exactly 30 minutes before stopping abruptly. The moment it ended, silence consumed the night, leaving Ethan alone with his thudding heart. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps an animal was burrowing in his backyard. Maybe a neighbor was doing some strange late-night gardening. But he had no close neighbors. For a week, Ethan ignored it. But curiosity gnawed at him. He thought about calling the police, but what would he say? That someone was digging, but he was too afraid to check. That he suspected a phantom gardener. Finally, on the 8th night, he decided to investigate. Ethan stepped out onto his back porch, flashlight in hand. The cold air bit at his skin as he scanned the yard. The sound was louder outside. Someone was definitely digging. He followed the noise, his breath coming out in shaky plumes. As he reached the far end of his yard, the beam of his flashlight landed on freshly disturbed earth. A large hole had been dug, 6 feet deep and long enough to fit a body. His body went rigid as the light caught something glinting at the head of the grave. A tombstone. Carved into the weathered stone was his own name. Ethan Graves, born 1987, died 2024. His heart hammered against his ribs. A trick? A prank? But who would go to such lengths? His hands trembled as he reached out, running his fingers over the engraved letters. The stone was cold and solid. Real. Then, behind him, a whisper drifted through the air. "You're late." Ethan whirled around, his flashlight flickering. The night was empty, no one stood behind him. But the whisper had been so close, as if someone had leaned in to breathe the words against his ear. His chest tightened. He stepped back, nearly tumbling into the open grave. The shadows seemed to press in around him, thick and heavy. He didn't wait to see if anything else would happen. He bolted for his house, slamming and locking the door behind him. The next morning, he tried to convince himself it had been a nightmare. But when he forced himself to look outside, the grave was still there. The tombstone still bore his name. Ethan spent the day researching, trying to find logical explanations. Sleepwalking. A prankster. A local legend he had somehow become a part of. But nothing fit. The land his house sat on had no history of hauntings. No past crimes. No explanations. As the day faded into night, dread settled into his bones. He considered leaving, getting in his car and driving as far away as possible. But something deep inside told him that no matter where he went, the digging would follow. When the clock struck 3 a.m., he sat in bed, gripping a baseball bat. He wouldn't go outside this time. Wouldn't look. But as the first scrape of the shovel hit the earth, he felt an overwhelming urge to investigate. No, not an urge. A compulsion. His body moved before his mind could stop it. He found himself at the back door, then stepping into the night, the digging sound growing louder. He didn't want to go back to the grave, but something unseen pulled him forward, guiding his feet over the damp grass. The grave was deeper now. And at the bottom of it stood a figure. Ethan's breath hitched. The figure was a man. No, it was him. The doppelganger stared up at him with lifeless eyes, holding a shovel in both hands. Dirt covered its clothes, its fingers blackened with soil. But its face was identical to Ethan's, down to the scar on his chin from a childhood accident. The thing in the grave smiled. "It's time," it said. Ethan stumbled backward, shaking his head. "No. This isn't real."